John Chauvin, when I asked him, I spoke to him about 2 weeks ago, and I said, what should I talk about? And John said, well, you should talk about the economy. And then I looked at the dais today, and there's like 4 Nobel Prize winners in economics and stuff like that. Ultimately, you're going to hear the B student talk tonight about the economy. You've heard a lot today. What I thought I'd do today, just given the late hour, you've had a long day, is maybe give you a quick blast in 4 topics. The first one is the way a CEO looks at the world today from a macroeconomic standpoint and the way we make decisions. The second is to you've had a chance today to debate a lot of stuff that's wrong or that's troubling about the United States. I thought I'd go through quickly just 10 things that I think are working in the U.S. today that could provide the foundation to an economic renaissance in this country. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Jobs Council and then end with a view of where I think business can help government in terms of the long-term competitiveness of the country. And I'll do that in 20 minutes and then be happy to take questions. So GE is a global company. I look at 4 things, basically, on my dashboard about how the world's going, where to invest, and how we think the world's going to be this year. First one's China. And when I go to China, I spend a lot of time not just in Beijing and Shanghai. I travel the country. And China's not only important just for China, but it's important because it's the engine that draws the rest of the emerging markets. I see pretty good, consistent growth in China. Going through a political transition, I don't see any way that they let the economy fall back, at least in the next year or 2. We see our businesses growing in a pretty robust pace in China, not without problems, but a pretty robust pace. And we see the resource-rich of the countries that are being pulled by China also doing well. So at least in the near term, I would say the big engine appears to keep pulling. U.S. What's the strength of the U.S. consumer? What's the strength of the U.S. economy? Could surprise on the upside, quite honestly. The 2 things I look at are rail loadings, because rail loadings are a pretty good precursor to the economic strength. Those are pretty good. And for the first time in really 5 years, our appliance shipments to the housing market will grow 10% in the first quarter this year. First time in 5 years. So I think that's pretty good. So I'd say the U.S., not without problems, could be good. Number 3, Europe. Europe will be somewhere between like bad and terrible. It's going to be bad would be that basically we avoid a Lehman Brothers event, that there's no big unhealthy catastrophe. That's kind of where I think we're heading. Terrible would be if a bank went down, if you had some other catastrophic event, some country other than Greece having a contagion. I think we're trending towards bad. We're not trending towards good, right? So there's no structural events have happened in Europe. So I'd say Europe is kind of neutralized in a bad place. And the big wild card, I think, is in inflation. There's a lot of volatility, and inflation is benign in some areas, but creeping up in others, and that can impact confidence and other things. So when I look at all those things, I would say, in general, 2012 has started off in a positive way, but there's still incredible volatility. And so as a company, you have to play offense and defense at the same time, and I think we could be in this situation for a long period of time of, I would say general, decent economic growth, but with a specter of volatility on the side. I'll talk just a little bit about GE, not as a commercial, just because I think it gives you a context of my frame of reference. It's basically all I know is my company. It's my only frame of reference anymore. I don't do research to do speed, come and talk to you, even though I love you. But I have to give you my frame of reference. So GE's a 130-year-old company. We're $155 billion in revenue. 60% of our revenue is outside the United States. 70% of our backlog is outside the United States. We're the biggest infrastructure company in the world. We're a $110 billion infrastructure company. We're in energy, oil and gas, aviation, water, basically all the essentials we do. That business is very strong, particularly outside the United States. We've got a $400 billion asset financial service business. Financial service business hasn't been that much fun the last couple of years, as you all have read. But I would say most of the financial services have gotten better faster than anybody would have ever thought. Even markets like commercial real estate in the U.S. are better, and that's pretty strong this year as well. We're the nation's second biggest exporter. We're a $20 billion exporter. We've got 300,000 employees, and we're kind of a classic third-century American company, the only company that's still on the Fortune or on the Dow Industrial after more than 100 years. So pretty resilient. The things we're good at, we're a good technology company. We're a good global company. We've got embedded relationships. We're good at productivity, and we invest $1 billion a year in training. So we like our people. We like investing, and so that's really GE. I read a Harvard Business Review article maybe last month that said 75% of people surveyed thought that the U.S. would be less competitive over the next 3 years. I disagree. I actually think American companies are more competitive today than they've been in any time in the last 25 years. I've crawled through every factory in China. I can look you in the eye and tell you that we've never been more competitive on a relative basis than we are today. So we believe in competitiveness, and I think that's actually where we are. So the economy's okay, getting better, lots of volatility. I'd say most American businesses, when I talk to other CEOs, are pretty optimistic about where we are. And again, I think having gone through the financial crisis, it kind of gives you a different perspective when you look at the future. But we think we can fight and win around the world. So with that, you've had some, I think, deep, heavy discussions today. You've had a chance to explore things that aren't working, challenges of the budget deficit, things like that. I thought what I'd do is just kind of fill your head with 10 things that I think can work in this country, that are either working today or provide the foundation of what success would mean going forward, and hopefully give you a little bit of optimism with a little bit of realism mixed in as you go forward. So 10 things that are working. Number one, we have to be a country about technology and science. GE is a well-managed company, but I would tell you for a fact, the science of science is more important than the science of management. I'll tell you for a fact. Now, I don't advocate bad management, by the way. But what I would say is that when we play our best in engineering and technology, when we focus on the things that count to make really great products, we win. Now, for the country, we invest 2% of the GDP in research and development. That's way too low. We graduate 135,000 engineers. China and India graduate 1 million. That's too low. And most companies, when I became CEO 10 years ago, we invested 2% of our industrial revenue back in R&D. Today it's 6. So technology, innovation, science is the secret to success. Where that's happening, the U.S. can win and will win. Boeing's going to launch the 787, the Dreamliner. It's maybe 3 years late. It performs best when it uses our engines, which it does 70% of the time. It's a plane that's 25% more fuel efficient than what it replaces. The Chinese, in 30 years, won't have a plane that can compete with that plane. So when we play at scale, when we play with technology, we win. Never forget it. Number two, a big source of productivity for this country in the next decade is going to be manufacturing. Now, manufacturing's taken on, Clint Eastwood at halftime of the football game, this romantic. I don't believe so much in romance unless I'm with my wife. I believe in facts and figures and stuff like that. I would say actually manufacturing is going to be quite important to the future of the country for the following reason. From 1980 till basically 2003, 2004, materials were cheap and labor was expensive. And when materials are cheap and labor is expensive, you outsource. It doesn't really matter. Now materials are expensive and labor is cheap. We're in an inflationary cycle. Who knows how long it's going to last? When you're in an inflationary cycle, you want to control your supply chain. You want to manufacture. And it becomes a source of competitive advantage. We're moving 1,000 jobs back from Mexico and China back to Louisville to make appliances. It is our most competitive business. We are cost competitive with those two countries because during the crisis, we went to the unions and said we'd like an opening wage scale of $16 an hour. We can make any of our appliances in less than 2 hours of labor. And at $16 an hour with modern lean manufacturing, the U.S. can compete with any country in the world, including Mexico and China. So that's what we'll do. That's how we'll win. And that's how these jobs will come back. And that's how you become an exporter. And so I think manufacturing is actually quite important for the future of the country. It's beyond just the romantic notion. It's the substance of how you build productivity. Number 3. Everything that you have seen in this part of the world about social media, the ability to use analytics, digital connections around the consumer, that all in the next decade is going to be applied to the industrial world. The industrial internet is the next big wave of productivity. It is unbelievable what it's going to do. We put an engine on a Boeing aircraft, let's say. It has 15 sensors. It takes 90,000 parameters a year. Those parameters allow us to optimize the fuel burn, allow us to optimize the maintenance and the cost. The airline industry last year collectively lost $3 billion. If we could get 1% more, just on the GE installed base, 1% more fuel burn, that's $3 billion. We basically can create entirely new productivity for our customers, taking the same tools that have been applied in social media into the industrial internet. Unbelievably exciting. So productivity through manufacturing and the industrial internet, I think, are going to revolutionize how productive this country can be. Number 4, really joining the global environment, the global marketplace. The one thing that this generation of American business leaders can't get wrong is globalization. Can't get wrong. I joined GE in 1982. I've worked for the company for 30 years. There's a reason why the U.S. economy was so robust for the past, let's say, 25 years. The baby boomers were in their peak consumption period. Inflation was low. You had credit that in some ways was pushed too hard. You had all the productivity unlocked by the technology generation. Those were all great. Those all fueled the U.S. Some of those are going to have to be reversed in the next few years. The big driver of the next 10, 15, 20 years, there are going to be 1 billion new consumers in the emerging markets. It is happening as we sit here tonight. It is going to happen. It is going to happen. It's driven by demographics. It's driven by transfer of wealth from oil prices being high or iron ore prices being high. But the global phenomenon is real and big. Everybody talks about China and India. China and India are important. They're important to GE. India will do maybe $3 billion this year. China will probably be a $6 billion business. But the resource-rich parts of the world, people don't talk about as much. Latin America, Africa, Russia, Middle East. These places have unbelievable opportunities for the U.S. You know, China's big, but it's hard. These places are equally big, and they're not quite as hard. And that's what I think American businesses are discovering. We'll be bigger in Australia this year than we'll be in China, mainly because of the iron ore, the minerals, things like that. So one of the things I always say in GE is always do the easy things first. There are a lot of places around the world that are easy, but the global phenomenon is very strong. Don't be mistaken. We can't get left behind. We need to be bigger in exports. We need to double exports. And American companies need to be better in that. Number 5. One of the most important things that we can export, or one of our biggest competitive advantages, is education. It is something that the U.S. does better than any other country in the world. It'd be a shame if we lose that by having bad immigration policies or backward-looking investment policies. When we go to Brazil, the fact that we can train workers better than our European or our Asian counterparts gives us a tremendous competitive advantage. And since 2002, one of the first things I did when I went to China is I went to Jiang Zemin and said, let us train 20 Chinese CEOs every year at our Leadership Institute. And we have done that for a decade. So we have 200 alumni of the China CEO program and leadership training. They're now running airlines and utilities and all. It's the best market development we've ever done. But never lose sight of the fact that intelligence, knowledge, and education is a huge competitive advantage in this country. That's number 5. Number 6, one of the strengths of the U.S. is really what we call mid-market companies. Mid-market companies. Everybody talks about small business, but the strength of the U.S. is the $10 million to $1 billion company. It's about a third of the economy. It's the fastest growing piece of the economy through the crisis. It is the best customer base. It's the best investor base. It's where we focused GE Capital. It is the heart and soul of the U.S. economic structure. These are our suppliers. They're our customers. Incredible strength. And this has to be the group we focus on in the American renewal. It has to be the place that we make sure gets capital. It's the place that regulation hits first. And so a focus on the mid-market customer is going to be incredibly important as we look forward in the future. Number 7, how do we keep healthcare inflation at CPI or lower? CPI or lower. How do you keep healthcare inflation at 3 or 4%? GE is an interesting company because we have a huge healthcare business. We have a $20 billion healthcare business. And we also are a big healthcare provider, a big healthcare payer. We spend $3 billion a year on healthcare costs. And what I would say is we earn a little bit more in our healthcare business than we spend on healthcare costs. And if we can have like a natural hedge, that's a good thing for us as we look forward. But we see it on both sides, and that makes us somewhat unique. I never became a good manager, a good leader of our healthcare business until I became a better manager of our healthcare cost, until I had a better understanding of our healthcare cost. And for the past 3 or 4 years inside the company, we've become very focused on managing our own healthcare cost. And for the past 3 years, our healthcare cost per employee has gone down. And I've seen enough to believe that this actually can be managed, this actually can be achieved. And I think that's going to be a big part of how we have to think about the country going forward. It takes 3 or 4 things. Consumer-based, employee-based plans, high-deductible plans. We will never become better until we have accountability by the people consuming healthcare. We went to a high-deductible plan in 2008. We spent a year of education with our employees. The first year, our healthcare costs went down 15%. As much as you might hate Paul Ryan's proposal on Medicare, some derivative of that ultimately is going to be where we end up as a country if we want to control healthcare costs. You will never get there until there's some personal accountability. The second thing we need to do is really focus on chronic disease. 80% of the healthcare cost is focused on chronic disease. Early detection of disease is incredibly important. Stanford Medical School is a leader in a lot of that. Really important. We've got to drive low-cost systems. In India, a memo exam costs $50. In the U.S., it costs $400. Now, it's not all apples to apples, but we can bring lower-cost systems from around the world to the United States to drive productivity. And we need drastic payment reform. But I'm here to tell you that can never happen at the national level. There's no such thing as national health care in the United States. This happens city by city by city. We've done a program in Cincinnati, which is the biggest employee base we've got, with all the other companies in Cincinnati, Kroger's, P&G. Collectively, we've worked on the same standards of care, information systems. We need 50 cities in the United States driving healthcare costs down. So if you think about it that way, if you think about it as a systems problem, we can't tolerate as a country 9% inflation. It is impossible. But we can get healthcare costs back down to CPI. That's number 7. Number 8, you sit in a country that is hit it rich with natural resources and energy. We have natural gas finds that are extraordinary. No one on Earth, and I got to tell you, us included, would have ever modeled natural gas at $2.50 per million BTU. We sit in the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. Incredible find. Now, if this find had been any place else in the world, people would be partying in the streets, celebrating that we have been liberated, that we can take care of our own future, we can create an energy future. Not us. We're trying to find a way to kill it as we speak. We're trying to find a way to slow it down. So this country has both natural resources and intellectual resources to take control of its energy future. And, when you hear people in Washington say they're all in on energy or their energy policy is all of the above, that doesn't mean anything. That won't lead us anywhere. But if you hear people say, look, we are going to maximize our natural resources and be good for the environment, we're going to set standards from a regulatory standpoint that are known by all, and not change them and not do Roman votes every time a new energy project comes up. If we kept investing in innovation and in renewables and things like that, we would have an energy policy. But I think if you look at healthcare and energy as being two pillars of competitiveness, we can do both these. I'm here to tell you, we're in both businesses. We can do both these. That's number 8. Number 9, I was in Brazil about a month ago, and, guys my age in Brazil lived through hyperinflation of the late 80s and early 90s and made them better business people. Having gone through 2008 and 2009 made us better business people. I don't want to do it again, by the way. I have to say. It wasn't all that much fun. But we have seen tail risk up close and personally. And I think we've got a generation of business people that are better risk managers, much better risk managers than, after 25 years of really benign economies, much better. And I think what you learn in coming out of a crisis like this is you got to have a lot more cash, because these events just aren't predictable. But you've got to be good at just basic risk-reward equations. And I think all American CEOs have gotten better just at basic risk-reward equations. I'll give you just a brief story. In 2002, we bought Enron's wind business out of bankruptcy for $200 million. And basically the principal, the guys basically said to me, Jeff, it's only $200 million. That's all you can lose. And yeah, I know you think it's a hula hoop or it's not that real, but it's only that. That's all we can lose. And we went ahead and did it. And now we generate maybe $1 billion of cash a year on that investment. I made some dumb investments. That's not one of them. I was in Europe last week. The guys were showing me one offshore wind project in Germany, one offshore wind project. And they said, look, if everything goes well, you can earn $50 million, but there's $200 million of consequential damages, right? I said, no, thanks. Really, anything that takes a frogman to install, we're not going to do, right? So I think learning how to manage risk-reward equations is a positive outcome of the crisis that makes us better. That's number 9. We've got a much better risk framework. The 10th thing I'd say that's positive, and I mean this with humility and sincerity, is one of the things that makes companies fun. One of the things I love about working at GE, and I've loved working at GE for 30 years, is people in our company like each other. This notion that workers and managers hate each other, this notion that small business and big business hate each other, this notion that financial service industry and industrial industry hate each other is just BS. It might exist in a commercial or on cable news or in Washington, D.C. It's not the way the world works. Companies are about teamwork from the factory floor to the CEO's office. Companies are about extended enterprise to the supply chain. Companies are about people working together. And this sense of determination and commonality is what makes companies fun to work for. And I think in the end, that's how problems get solved. So I'd give you just 10 ideas. I'd say we live in the era of science and engineering, and we can't say that enough. The 2 big productivity levers are manufacturing, the industrial internet. There's 1 billion new customers that don't live in the United States. If you're not out chasing them down, you're going to lose. I give you a couple countries. I give you Peru, Iraq, Mongolia, Angola. 4 countries. $2 billion of GE revenue in 2012. Right? When I was 18 years old, I had a globe in my room. Growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, I couldn't even find those 4 countries on the map. Right? $2 billion, that's the future. Grab it. Healthcare and energy, we can solve. And never forget that one of the best parts about companies is people respect each other and they work together. And so those 10 things make me think that the world's not quite so bad. and that we can solve these problems together if we really put our mind to it. Laura and I worked on the Jobs Council for the President of the United States. We take credit. If you liked this morning's numbers, Laura and I take credit for it. Laura, well done. Good job. So we 26 of us came together in the beginning of 2011, multinational CEOs, small business CEOs, economists, labor leaders, really for the purpose of trying to drive jobs and competitiveness. Our effort was practical. It was nonpartisan. It was, multi-time horizons. I thought the group worked very well together. It's, guys, it's not an easy time to be working on councils like that. I was criticized by Dennis Kucinich and Bill O'Reilly in the same day. When you can get, you're either doing something right or you're in like the seventh ring of hell. One of the two. But nonetheless, we went on, and basically we broke the work into three basic areas. The first one is fill open jobs today. The best thing you can do about employment today is there's 2.5 million open jobs that are unfilled today in the United States. And this is a function of training. It's a function of cycle time reduction. It is the most immediate and urgent task that we have as a country. I'll give you an example of one of the things we worked on that's actually worked. It is a 6-month cycle time if you're trying to go from Brazil to the United States on a travel visa. If you're going to Europe, you don't need a visitor visa. The country's lost 50% of its market share in the travel and leisure industry in the last decade. That's 300,000 jobs. So what do you do about it? You reduce the cycle time. If you reduce the cycle time, you create jobs. That happens fast. That happens within 6 months. That's what we've done. Ideas like that work. In the midterm, we looked in 2 to 5 year time horizon and said, how can we create a couple million jobs? There we focused on high skill education. We focused on high growth enterprises. We focused on infrastructure. We focused on regulation, exports, and FDI. In each one of those, we can make great progress. Infrastructure was one that Laura led with Rich Trumka. I don't understand our aversion in this country to infrastructure. I just don't get the fact that people have such a hatred of just doing the most rudimentary things. If you said, what's the secret to China's success? The thing that China's done better than any country in the world is invest in infrastructure. It's liberated the economy. And so, ideas like that and presenting them to the president. And then in phase 3, we talked about more competitive systems, tax reform, regulatory reform, long-term investment. And in all, we made about 85 recommendations to the president. He's been a good partner in the process. We've got a group inside OMB. About half the recommendations are being implemented. And so we just keep trying to track the implementation. And, at the end of the day, the government doesn't create jobs. We all know that in this room. But it can create the mood, the momentum, the tone that can help create the foundations on which jobs get created. And that's the spirit with which we took this on. We did 25 listening and action sessions around the country where we tried to listen to small businesses and things like that. And, we did the best we could to try to create the right tone and try to create a little bit of momentum around jobs. And what I'd say is at any given point in time, there's probably a couple million jobs that we can get through the system just by, trying to reduce regulatory barriers or things like that. I learned a couple lessons, right, as doing a part of this process. The first one is if you want jobs, work on competitiveness. The country slipped in competitiveness. And we can sit and scream about jobs all we want. We can sit and watch people talk about jobs all we want. But until we fix education, until we fix some of the regulatory reforms, you're not going to create jobs that we need to create in this country. We've got to love to compete. We've got to love to win. We've got to have a society that looks and says, we're number 25 in math. That's a sin. Until we get in the top 10, the country's not going to be good. Let's work on ways to be good. Let's think about those kinds of activities. So with no competition, with no competitiveness, you get no jobs. And there's no easy road. The road to the future is a toll road, and the toll is competitiveness, number one. Number two, the most difficult thing I'd say in Washington isn't well-meaning people. It's creating a sense of urgency. There is no sense of urgency. None. Zero. You know, if you got, here's what, if any one of you were airlifted in and become CEO of the U.S. tomorrow, and you said the following: no regulation, no permitting process can take more than a year. More than a year. Now, you know, we can build a space shuttle like every 7 days, but we can't get a permit approved in 6 years. So just by reducing cycle time, creating a sense of urgency, demonstrating that you're all in, that's what's lacking today. And we can, you know, Republicans are going to say one thing on regulation, Democrats can say another. I say don't pick that fight. But why it would take 12 years to get a transmission line approved across state lines, that's ridiculous. And we just tolerate that, and that's where jobs get lost. So love to compete, sense of urgency. If you did those things, the country would be better. But look, I was honored to serve the president. I was honored to serve with people like Laura. Everybody on the council did the best, you know, that we could to represent all of you and do a good job. So that's what we did on the Jobs Council. Lastly, I just make a couple comments on business, and you know, we get a lot of criticism, and you know, some of it is well deserved. You know, and I think business has to understand the context of the world that they live in, and the fact that you have Tea Party people on the right or Occupy Wall Street on the left. We've got to expect that. You know, institutions didn't do what they were supposed to do. We have every right to expect that people are angry, but anger doesn't solve problems. You know, populism doesn't solve problems. You got to ultimately solve problems. And so in the end, I'd say, what can CEOs do to do a better job collectively for the country? I'd say there's a couple things. The first one is we all should endorse Simpson Bowles. We all should endorse deficit reduction. None of us are going to like it completely. There are things that are going to, you know, GE's not going to like. There's things that other companies aren't going to like. But we need to get on deficit reduction. I think the one thing companies can do better than governments is we can adapt faster. And we can move faster. And wherever Simpson Bowles goes, we can adapt quickly. And you know, I read it again over the holidays. I'd recommend everybody in this room read it, because in some way, shape, or form, that's what's coming down. I think we have to engage in solving some of the big problems. And I would just again reiterate healthcare. The fact is that companies have been lousy purchasers of healthcare for 30 years. And if we're lousy purchasers of healthcare, if companies are lousy purchasers of healthcare, the government doesn't have a chance. And you know, I just think getting our act together in things like healthcare, education, you know, that is a real factor that the private sector can add, I think, to improve broadly. Number 3, at any given point in time, any multinational company or any company, there's probably, you pick the number, 2 or 3 or 5% of our jobs that are discretionary. Those discretionary jobs should come to the U.S. You know, we're a global company, right? We don't run a charity. We run a private enterprise. We got to win in every corner of the world. But in a company like Boeing or GE, there's around the edges, there's jobs that can come here. They need to come here now. And that's what we've tried to do. And that's what other companies have tried to do without hurting our competitive advantage and things like that. And then I'd just say the last thing that every company needs to be accountable for is taking care of our, you know, making sure that we're competitive, taking care of our own employees, giving them self-confidence. If you're an hourly worker in GE in our aviation business, you think you can win. You think you can win. You think you can beat any country in the world, and we owe that to all of you. May not help each person in this room, but if we can take care of our 135,000 employees in the U.S. and we can teach them to compete, we can make them productive, we can make them competitive, that's the task in the end that we need to be accountable for. So Simpson Bowles, big competitive systems, around the edges create jobs, take care of our own. That's what I think companies road. Look, we can do better as leaders. The country needs better leadership. The thing we can't control is the environment we're in. We live in a volatile time. Whether or not gas prices reach $4 or $5 this summer has very little to do with what happens in this country. It has more to do with what happens in Iran. It has more to do with what happens in China. And that's discomforting to our fellow citizens, the fact that more and more of the things that impact our life are impacted or controlled by places outside the United States. And so, again, what we have to do is make ourselves ready and do a better job of communicating the strategies and taking the key actions that are important in the future. So, in conclusion, the world's getting better. There are many things that are working in the U.S. that we can put into long-term solutions for the future. Jobs are kind of everybody's job. And in the Jobs Council, that's what we try to do. And again, I think companies have responsibilities to make each generation more competitive than the one before. And we've got to do our job to make sure that the U.S. stays competitive and stays able to compete in the global economy. So those are my comments, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
So I don't have much of a role here. I'm going to play Vanna White and point people out for those of you who know who she is, but thank you.
Thanks, John.
I was first going to ask you, I was just reflecting on the fact that Kodak has gone broke and GE is a 19th century company that hasn't gone broke. It's a very strong and vital company. It's the only, as you mentioned, the only original member of the Dow that's still around. So what's the secret? What went wrong at Kodak, and how does GE do it?
So, look, I think there's three things that go into long-term sustainability, and it's commitment to performance, commitment to integrity, commitment to change. We retool our portfolio aggressively. We invest $1 billion a year in training, and we're resilient. The company has gone through bad times. The company makes mistakes. But we're resilient, and we keep coming back. But I think it's this sense of reinvention. So GE was founded in 1874. Basically, was the genesis of the company. So think about what will Google look like in 2120. What will Google be doing? We were making light bulbs in the 1890s. Now we're making jet engines or nuclear power plants or gas turbines or things like that. And we're doing it in 140 countries around the world. So I think it's this notion of reinvention, competitiveness, integrity, but I'd say also humility and learning. Because if you're around for 130 years, you've made 130,000 mistakes. And so you better be willing to learn from them and get better because of them.
Okay, we've got 15 minutes left, so let's give him some questions. Yes, right here.
Hi, great talk, and I appreciate that. Udaya from Jump Associates. And quick question for you. You set a target years ago of around 8% organic growth for GE, and you've been able to hit it some years, and it's been great. When you think about the role of innovation in being able to drive that growth going forward, what does it look like for you? How does it look more challenging for the next 10 years? And what are you doing specifically to make sure that you can continue doing that?
Look, I think 8, in some ways, when we said it, was probably too high. I think in general, a company our size, if we can go maybe 2 or 3 times GDP, so maybe 5 or 6%, and you got to be doing a lot of things right to do that. So on a base of, let's say, industrially of $110 billion, that's $5 or $6 billion a year. That's real money. So you got to be in some big places. So I think large-scale innovation, where we've got big technical bets that we're making, and you got to be doing it in the right parts of the world. So you got to be in all the right places in some industries that have tailwind, and you got to be constantly pruning slower growth businesses and getting into faster growth businesses. So we sell plastics because it can only grow at, let's say, half GDP. And we reinvest back in oil and gas because they can grow at 3 times GDP. So portfolio, technology, and you've got to be in the right geographies that drive the growth.
Over here.
Okay, isn't the problem with infrastructure the problem that whatever you construct, you also have to maintain, and ultimately you've got to replace? That's a question.
Yeah, the best part about being if you think about our our business model is we invest a lot in technology, we get a long-lived installed base, and then we have these huge service streams. So we earn 60 or 70% of our earnings on services, and it's a very capital efficient, big barriers to entry, and that's why we like the business. We like the maintenance as well as the new installation. But I was in Nigeria maybe a month ago. Nigeria is, let's say, number 6 in oil, number 7 in gas, and they have a 50 gigawatt deficit in power generation. 50 gigawatts. So they have money and they don't have power. I have power and I want their money. So we're almost a natural marriage, right? So you've got a nice relationship. Now, you got to worry about transparency and all the other stuff, but I could repeat that story in 50 countries around the world. There's not enough electricity. The water isn't good. They need to move people either on airlines and locomotives. And so, 60 or 70% of our business in the 90s was in the United States. The U.S. today is only 20 or 30% of our business. Now, the U.S. someday will reinvest back in infrastructure again. And when the U.S. reinvests back in, we're going to have some, we already have the global tailwind, but someday you'll get the U.S. tailwind as well. So that's why we like infrastructure.
Yes, right here.
Jeff, is the world changing? Or right over here.
Okay, John.
It's your
the
largest
big boss.
shareholder.
Yeah.
How is the world changing, especially the developing world, on corruption? How do you see that versus 5 years ago, and in terms of your operations?
So it's much better, John. I would say most countries around the world are coalescing around U.S. systems over time, but never be naive about it. There's still a lot of corruption around the world, and it's still something that you've got to be mindful of. But probably 10 or 20 years ago, our big European competitors would all do facilitating payments, and it was a wild world. Most of that has changed. I would say most European, most American, most Asian companies all operate on the same standards today. But FCPA, foreign corrupt practices, are still a big issue. We don't buy one oil and gas company that doesn't have some kind of foreign corrupt practices, and so you've just got to be vigilant about it all the time. Meanwhile, the standards, I think, do get better every year.
Yes, right here. Gerhard.
Go ahead and ask, and I'll repeat it.
I'm certainly not going to question your 10 points. It was very refreshing to hear that. But going back to the very beginning of what you said, China, and indeed following up on John's point now about corruption, those who look at China and are well informed do not think the rule of law is something that is succeeding in China very well. And I'm wondering, what does that look like from the perspective of the CEO of General Electric? Do you worry about your investments? Do you worry about being subject to arbitrariness? Not corruption as such, but the more general picture.
China, I think, is really hard. China is ever-changing and is still a difficult, never easy place to do business. My first trip to China was 1984. I went there as a really young guy, and I've done a lot of business in China over the years. How would I describe it? The government is the player. I mean, what makes China so different is the government's the player. And if you want to do business in China, study the 5-year plans, and you either decide, do you want in or do you want out? But it's not like you're going to go in front of Premier Hu and say, I don't like the 11th 5-year plan, I don't want to play. It's not like he says, oh, good point, Jeff, let me rethink it. It's like this is the way it goes. And you've got to make your own choices. There's not one decision that gets made in China that I don't personally make for the company. Not one. One I'm talking about, strategic decision. And I've done this job for 10 years. I've probably done, let's say, maybe 8 or 10 big decisions. And 5 have been great, 1 or 2 have been okay, and a couple have been really terrible stink bombs, you know. And that's what you got to be, I've been around long enough that I know what to say yes to and what to say no to. And so I'd say China's still a work in progress. And do I worry about intellectual property? Yes. Do I worry about cybersecurity? Yes. And you just have to be vigilant and protect yourself from. But if you're not participating in China, you're not participating in the world. If you're not there, you're not participating in the world. And you can't, I can go to the Stanford bookstore and I can buy a book on marketing or strategy and still learn something. I can't buy one book on globalization and learn anything. Not one. Because you got to live it. It changes so fast. You have to have your own nose for what works and what doesn't work. And it's humbling, but it's the way it goes. So I think China is always difficult. But, at the end of the day, the strategy we've kind of embarked on is to be big in China, but win the resource rich. In other words, our team is going to win big in Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Australia, Canada, Russia. All the countries that get pulled by China, they're a hell of a lot easier than China. And so you need to be there, but you got to recognize, connect the dots about where you play, and in the end, if you think about our competitors, who are the state-owned enterprises, if you're not forced to compete, you never become good. You never become good. If the government gives you things, you never become good. And so, the fact that we have to go out and sing for our dinner in every country in the world, that's a good thing, ultimately. That makes us better. It is humbling. And, I get angry, of the companies like GE globalize because they don't like the U.S. anymore, blah, 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 blah. It's just wrong. We make 140 heavy-duty gas turbines. We have 50% market share. Less than 5 will go to the United States. Less than 5. Big factory in South Carolina will make 100. 0 go to the U.S. Now, let me tell you guys something. It is like 100 times harder to sell a gas turbine in Germany or China than it is in Chicago. 100 times harder. So I would love it if all my customers were in Chicago. It would be the best day of my life. But that's not reality. The reality is they're every place else. And so, as you're driving home tonight, like us a little bit, in terms of, we are out competing in every corner of the world, and they're tough places.
Yeah, over here, I guess. Gene, who are you pointing at? Corner in the back. There we go. Okay.
Hi. Thanks for your comments tonight, and also thank you again for your service to the country and the Jobs Council. With that said, the public perception of the president and the administration is anti-business. I don't want to put you in a tough spot, but I've found tradition. That's what we do here at SIEPR on occasion. How do you feel about that public perception, if indeed that's true or not, in terms of...
I'm not going to answer the question. So, but here's what I would say. I think the president has been a great partner on the Jobs Council. He's been a great partner. He's listened. I think he's tried to put stuff in practice. And that's really all I could ask for on that. So he's been a great partner. I think he wants to see the country do well. And, I just am not going to criticize him at all. I'm just not going to.
Jeff, we have a question over on this side.
Yes, I was wondering, so you mentioned GE Capital. What are your thoughts on financial regulation or deregulation, the removal of Glass-Steagall, various kinds of financial insurance products and so on? What do you think should be done now?
Again, I think more regulation is called for. The industry didn't perform at its finest. We can all debate what form that should take, but for now, I just think we've got to be reflective and try to make it work as best we can. And do I like everything about Dodd-Frank? No. Do I think some things could retard growth as time goes on? I do. But I just don't think people want to listen to any of the Wall Street CEOs or the GE CEO complain about it. And I just think we're just going to have to let the process run its course and see where it goes. And ultimately, the way all regulation has worked over time is that it's pro-cyclical, right? It is not in place when the problems happen. It tends to push in the wrong direction at the wrong time. And the only way it corrects is through self-correcting. And when it retards growth, smart people are going to stand up and say, let's do it differently. I think the biggest challenge, quite honestly, of Dodd-Frank is its time. It's 250 regulations, of which maybe 30 have been decided. So you got 220 yet to go. How long is that going to last till 2020 or something? I think that's the most aggravating part of it is just the gestation period is huge.
I think we're going to call this to a close. Jeff, thank you very much.
Thanks,
You're a straight shooter.
Great. Thanks. Thanks.